Pioneering surf parks took 10 years to go from pipe dream to paying customers. 10 years! How can digging a hole, filling it with water, agitating that water, and asking people for money be so incredibly complicated? Today's wave pool projects get done on a much shorter timeline, thanks to lessons learned from those early adopters in the space. In Wave Pool Mag sessions, we hear from the brightest minds in the business. Everything's on the table topic-wise, from choosing a tech provider to maximizing food and beverage revenue, and more. So join us for Wave Pool Mag sessions. Today's discussion, we're going to have Skip Taylor, partner at Surf Park Management, and James Miles, head of sales and partnership at Urban Surf Melbourne, and soon to be Urban Surf Sydney, which is opening very shortly. These two veterans in the space will address how best to keep customers on site at your venue. Both Skip and James have real-world experience from two very different venues. And today they will go ahead and share their knowledge and, if we're lucky, some of their best practices. Are you guys going to divulge some of those secrets?
You bet.
Okay, right on.
No problem.
Before we begin, I'd like to remind the audience that toward the end of the program, you'll be able to ask our panelists questions. Just hit the little chat icon bubble on your screen. In about 30 to 45 minutes, and Skip and James will take your questions. So let's start out with kind of broad strokes. Everyone thinks I'm opening a surf park. It's going to be this great thing. We'll get people, they'll pay this much for a session. We'll sell hot dogs for $10 or whatever. There's a lot more to it. Skip, do you want to jump in and help explain to our audience what else is involved in keeping someone on site at your wave pool?
Yeah, definitely. I think, in terms of what's been ingrained in my life, coming from a background at ski beach and golf resorts, is that, I've always had a fundamental focus that you need to create ways for guests to do more at any destination. And, coming into the surf park world, that is a core fundamental we kept. The more they do, the better experience they have, the more they spend, you develop better customer loyalty, and they're more likely to tell their friends. And then ultimately, they're more likely to come back, right? And it's a really ecosystem that of a customer journey that you want to really focus on in your design and development stage of the facility. And there's basically two primary ways, and we'll get into some of the details, but one is through physically what you build and what the assets are, and the second one is programming, and both those tie hand in hand to what you do, and those are where you're going to create your dwell time on property. And I'd add one final caveat to the opening, is that this customer loyalty cycle in the surf park world right now also has many development schemes that involve real estate. And, the ultimate expression of loyalty is when someone buys a piece of real estate. And that is going to be a key part of the ecosystem of these surf parks, and developing dwell time and loyalty is some of the real estate models that are building around some of these surf parks these days we're seeing.
All right. And, James, I'd like to hand it over to you and ask specifically what tools wave pools are using to keep guests hanging around. Everything from architecture, family amenities, discount pricing, food, chai lattes. What works in your experience?
Lattes are always good at 6 o'clock in the morning. First off, thanks for organizing these, Brian. I think it's really important that as an industry, we support each other. We're still such a nascent industry, right? It's still such early days that the more support we can do, the more successful developments we have, the easier it is to raise capital, the more successful we all are as an industry. So firstly, I wanted to say thanks for organizing these sessions, and great to be on here with Skip. It's an honor. And I think, a lot of what Skip has said is right. Before I sort of dive into specifics, I think there's probably a few overarching principles that are worth touching on. I also want to lay out a caveat that I'm neither a designer nor a developer. I'm a commercial leader, so I'm definitely going to swing in that lens. So I think there's a really important part of this conversation that what we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years is a real diversification of business models. Urban Surf is a pure play public access surf park. Waikai, obviously Skip is an experience-led hospitality business to a certain extent. We're seeing in Brazil these amazing residential developments, and I loved, the ultimate expression of loyalty is wanting to live at the park. That's a great way of framing it, Skip. I really like that. South Korea is a different model again. It's, it's a hybrid hotel scheme. So, and I think, the other model that we're really going to see over the next couple of years is what I call the heli ski model, which is essentially, more luxury resorts. It's like going to the Mentawais, but you've got a wave pool there as well. And I think, a space like Surf Abu Dhabi is in a really good position in that sort of model. So I think with all of these different models, you're going to need to think of the actual mechanics or the things that drive dwell time a little bit differently because the business model is a little bit different. But I agree with Skip that at a macro level, for most surf parks, it's the two C's, and that's commercial value and community value. So, surf park revenue is a function of utilization times average transaction value. Then the optimized version of dwell time is that I'm increasing that average transaction value, but then I'm enhancing guest experience through these moments of quiet delight, through satisfying, segment identified needs. And that's going to drive my lifetime customer value by making these people brand evangelists, making them loyal to your park. So I think, there's all the basics that we need there, from shade to food and beverage to chai lattes. I think programming is a really good theme that we can touch on here. But overall, if I'm adding things onto my venue, I'm looking for a diversification of my revenue lines, and I'm looking at how can I measure that that's increasing the commercial value of that customer. But at the same time, it's got to line up with community values. It's got to line up with social values so that person is becoming more loyal to my brand and they're coming more regularly to come and surf with me, and that's going to lift my lifetime customer value. I didn't really answer your question there. I did a separate one on you.
You both brought up something that going into this I wasn't focused on as much. I was looking more at the monetary exchange, how you price your hot dogs, chai lattes. But you both mentioned community and customer experience. So I'd love to jump into that and discover, how do you create a valuable customer experience so that someone wants to stay on site, they want to have their morning surf, and then, hang around, maybe go for a surf later, or make your wave pool part of their, weekly routine.
Yeah. I think, from my perspective, I did get a chance, over the years to travel. I'm sure James and you, Brian, have probably seen more surf pools than I, but traveling a lot of them, I'm often taking my wife along with me. And my wife is by no means a super hyped surfer. She's a reluctant surfer that will surf under the right conditions and has enjoyed many of the surf parks we've gone to. But I think a lot of surf parks get built sometimes with groups of very hyped surfers that sometimes haven't thought about the entire non-core surfer experience. And I've had the experience at a surf park that will remain nameless, where my wife has asked me for the car keys and the hotel key because she'd rather sit in a hotel than hang out at the surf park we were hanging at, because I had multiple surf sessions booked and would come back and pick me up in a few hours. So that really is, was a learning lesson for me as a real time, as I'm coming in there with my surf hat on, and really leads to me. And it's sometimes it's the simplest things. It's just a nice place to see the shading that James talked about. You talked about family spaces, right? Having, the stuff that's free, that's accessible, not paid for, is one level, right? And then you have the paid amenities, like maybe there's co-working spaces where people can be flexible to stay there longer and work. Maybe there's cabanas that people can lounge and hang out in, and those type of developments. So, I mean, those are, some of the first things that come to mind is, we always go through a matrix of any feasibility in any site. It's different, as James made great examples of. All these different facilities have very different customers, and we, it's like who can come when seeking what experience at what price. And that's what we kind of go through when you look at each market. And, it is going to be different at different locations. So what you add as amenities for those locations could change a lot, right? I'm sure over this discussion, we can talk some specifics and some ideas, but in general, big picture, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I'll jump in there because I think it's a really good point that you make. I think that customer segmentation, I think is, I spoke about it at Surf Park Summit a couple of years ago, is that data-driven approach to developing product. And, in that case, I was specifically talking about waves and programming, but that principle of customer segmentation, understanding your customer, and more importantly, understanding the job you do for that customer, I think really helps guide what you're doing in terms of adjacent facilities throughout it, whether it's Skip talking about the entourage that I'm coming to the park with. Do I have wellness sessions? Can, Skip's wife do yoga? Is my programming allowing us to interchange surf sessions? Do I have food and beverage? You mentioned there the concept of freemium, what we call dignified dwell space. So there should be free dignified dwell space so that if I'm coming to the park and I don't want to pay for an experience, there's still somewhere for me to get some shade, still somewhere where I feel comfortable sitting and chilling out in the park. But at the same time, we should be able to offer some step-up models if people want to pay for a sort of cabana with food and beverage services and things like that. It's a great commercial opportunity, adds community value. That's a great example of those two sort of lines intersecting. I think an example that I can give is that, we opened obviously targeting a really core market, and that's something you need to do as a surf park. You need to tick that authenticity box. But we really quickly learned that a big chunk of our demographic is what we call a progressive surfer. And Brian, you would have seen these people. They're getting changed in the car park, whacking on a wetsuit. They're coming in, they're surfing, and they're getting out of there. And, the job that we do for them is that we don't sell them waves, we sell them access to waves. And so anything that we're doing that potentially distracts from that job can have a negative effect. If we're sending them through the, the Disney theme park exit, although I do love Bob Iger and I thoroughly recommend his book, I don't want to send them through that Disney, when they're wet and they're getting changed in the car park, and it's actually slowing down the job that we do for them, which is, a quick, easy, accessible surf. So really understanding that segmentation and understanding the job that you do for that really allows you to help develop the different assets, the different commercialization that you have throughout the parks. And I think that, that core work on segmentation is just something that's so important. It's, it's something that as soon as we're opening Sydney, we'll be looking at in Sydney. And it's something that we're revisiting constantly in Melbourne is who is our target market? How are they represented? What are the different segments within that? And what's the job that we do for that segment?
And I think it's a great point, James, that it's an evolving job that never ends, right?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can't tell you, you can forecast and guess as much as you want as you're planning to open your surf park.
And you need to
pricing models together. You got to put something on the board.
Yeah.
But you're going to see what sticks and what doesn't work. And really quickly, you got to be able to adapt and change your pricing, your packaging, your bundling, your, how your passes work and be ready to service that market in a way that's gonna work for them. And I think every park that started up has gone through that hurdle, right?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point there that I'm not saying don't start with those and wait till you get data to do it. You need to make assumptions. That's your job as a developer is to go, this is who I'm building this space for. But just make sure that you've got those mechanics in place to be able to measure the data and have it coming through in a way that you can make less wrong decisions about, where you're going to spend your money, where you're going to invest in sort of different things throughout the park. I think it's such an important thing also to understand what are the metrics that matter in this space. And it's not necessarily just average transaction value. I mentioned Disney before, and Disney's role is just to juice everyone on their one visit because most people only go to Disney once. So that average transaction value is the key metric there. As a surf park, if you're just trying to juice your average transaction value and you're ignoring your lifetime customer value, or you're ignoring your NPS scores or your customer satisfaction data, whatever way you measure that, you're doing your business a disservice because, we need people coming back on a regular basis. Urban Surf needs members that surf with us every week. You need that underlying cohort of surfers, particularly in our business model as a pure play public access surf park. So making sure that you know what the metrics that matter are, and so that can guide your decision making, I think is such an important thing. And I think it's often overlooked by businesses. It's, we build the park and we'll see what happens, but what am I going to measure and what's going to help me make less wrong decisions as I move forward. You're never going to make right decisions in surf park. We're too fresh, but you can make less wrong decisions.
Yeah, I think you're right, James, because you see a lot of people coming into the surf park space that come from different backgrounds, right? And their lack of understanding of a lifestyle facility that people are coming to. It is a lot like, that's one of the, we tout as our business is we do have a strong background in ski and golf and these lifestyle sports that are very similar, right? In very many ways, that you have to create that loyalty to that core market, but you have to have a broader base to fill the funnel to make the business work. So, yeah.
And if you've got those, and I'm sorry, Brian, I can see you trying to jump in, but we're off on a roll now, buddy. Don't slow the train while it's running down the tracks. I think, you mentioned ski there, and look, I'm by no means a ski industry expert, doing a couple of ski seasons in Canada and drinking a lot of beer of Molson doesn't really count. But one of the things that I've looked at over the years is the journey of Vail. And it's funny, I had a couple of years ago, I had a mission statement to be the Vail of surf parks. And the transition that Vail underwent with the Epic Pass is a really interesting lesson in this space. So, Skip, correct me if I'm wrong on the details, because, this is all just from reading articles and things. But my understanding is that, Vail traditionally had about 80 to 85% of its revenue came through ticketing. And it was essentially on a linear pricing pathway. So what that means is essentially, my pricing goes up in line with CPI or inflation every year. So last year it would have gone up a lot. And so that price keeps on going up, and the willingness to pay of your consumers is impacted by that, the amount of times that person can come. When they brought in Epic Pass, the work they did underneath that was to bring a lot of their adjacent services, a lot of their ancillary revenue lines in-house. So they made sure that they owned as much of the accommodation on mountain as possible, as much of the F&B on possible. And when they opened Epic Pass up, essentially they made skiing a lot more affordable. So the average customer, instead of coming once because it was $100, could come 4 times because it was $25. But where they made up the ground was on all those adjacent facilities. So if someone's coming 4 times, the average season lifetime value of that customer was significantly greater, even though the average transaction value was lower. They've got to a point now that, I'm making up a figure here, but I think it's around 35% of their revenue comes from ticketing. And they essentially use that as a lever to bring more and less people on site. And they're actually making the money on the fact that they've got much higher repeat visitation, and they capture that all in their ancillary revenue line. So, I think it's a great call out. And again, I've probably butchered the history of the ski industry there, but at least as a model, that's a model that makes a lot of sense. And when you're diversifying your revenue like that, you're really de-risking a lot of your business. So it's a great lesson for developers.
Yeah, their model really was driven by cash flow and their ebbs and flows of a seasonal business, right? And what they've been able to do is create their this large sum of upfront cash flow that allows them to enter the ski season flush. That's, that is a great success. There's a lot of great learnings from Vail, but there's a lot of learnings on the negatives too. As somebody who's been a lifelong Whistler skier, I don't go to Whistler anymore because of Vail's behavior and how they run the facilities, and they've taken away the soul of the place. They centralized services. I came from a background where Interwest was the big company that came in and kind of changed what was the uphill transportation business into more of a commercial and real estate model, but left the soul of the culture of those unique resorts there. Vail is trying to unify everything. Everything's run out of Broomfield. There's no cultural connections and stuff. So it's a lesson, because this is going to happen in certain surf parks. There is groups, obviously, like what Urban Surf is doing in multiple parks. There's, the Beach Trees, the Adventures, and these are, mini startups. But I'm more, akin to companies like Altera and places that they have their version of their multi-resort passes that do the same thing, but they really leave a more unique community cultural experience at each of their facilities, and not centralized everything to the nth degree that has, whitewashed the experience for the local people. So, I do, it's a great discussion point, because it is coming, and that's part of the, the metrics of measurements and management tools that Vail is doing. They are masters at the science of marketing, right? Yeah. They are not anywhere close on the art of marketing. And in a lifestyle sport, there's the art of marketing and the science of marketing. And I always say you have to lead with the art and have the science as your backup as to what's going on there is my philosophy anyways.
No, and I think that entire discussion, actually, if you bring it all together, it actually loops back perfectly to what we both said at the start, is that you can't just have commercial. So, maybe Vail is, if you imagine there's a spectrum with commercial and customer experience on it, Vail has potentially gone to commercial. And look, there's probably developers out there that go, that's okay, mate. I'll just get my money back and make
their shareholders love it. Yeah.
Shareholders are happy. But at the other end, there's customer experience, right? And a balance of those is where you're going to get the optimum experience, where customers still feel like there's a heart and a soul and that they've been a key part of the thoughtfulness of design and development. But at the same time, the more that you can create commercial models that diversify your revenue lines and add value to customers, that's where you're going to get that best result. So, I was using that more as an example, and again, not a deep understanding of Vail, but as an example of how these auxiliary experiences or ancillary revenue streams can really help stabilize a business. And as you say, from a cash flow perspective, that's a great advantage as well. Brian, you should ask a question here, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. So I want to take it from the helicopter view. Let's ground you both. And you both work for very different venues, respectively. Rapid Wave versus Traveling Wave, Hawaii versus Melbourne. Earlier, you spoke to trying some things that frankly didn't quite work and other things that took off really well. Skip, can you tell us about that process? Like how you kind of floated some ideas like, oh, let's try this to keep customers on side. Let's throw this at the wall, see if it sticks.
Well, I can tell you a real life experience that we're living right this moment right now at Waikai and has come around is a great one, is that the venue is part of what's going to be probably $1 billion development by the time there's, another 300,000 feet of square feet of retail built out, hotel sites, resort residential. And, this got scaled down significantly before when COVID hit. And so it created a challenge that we knew was coming, and having enough body heat in the location we're at is not a tourist destination in Hawaii. And we went, through a tight budget from the ownership group, and what we ended up doing is having to do some value engineering and cutting some things out. And we're one of the things we're blessed with at our venue is we have the surf pool, and which is a key attraction. But our other key attraction is a 52-acre passive lagoon for paddle sports, swimming, recreation on. And from years ago in the beginning, we had always tried to push for a inflatable adventure course, or what we're calling now the Waikai Aqua Adventure Course, as trying to have a more diversified activity base for families, for people to come. And, they're expensive. It was over $500,000 installation and put in, and it got value engineered out of the plan. And we launched the facility, and Brian, you've been there and seen it. And, we do great with the local community and stuff, but there's still a missing component at times of the day. Like on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. is always the example, and everyone talks about the tough time in the world of a surf park existence, right? We still struggle at some of those times when the local community is there and we're not getting reaction from the tourism market. So the ownership in December decided to move forward with buying and going forward with what's called the Waikai Aquaventure course. And we installed the largest installation in North America, and it spells a giant aloha. So when you fly into Honolulu Airport the next time you come down, you'll look down and see this big giant aloha floating in our lagoon. And it has a capacity to host 300 to 400 people an hour on it at peak times, which is a massive amenity for families and children's and tourists to have alongside the surfer experience that's going on. When the surf experiences are relatively low volume at our park, it's maximum, when we have 2 lanes of operation going, it's maximum 20 people at a time. So that volume, and that body heat that our restaurants, that our retail and everything else needs can be boosted significantly by having a more higher volume facility like this. So we're opening that March 1 now, but it was in hindsight, we got valued engineered out, then got added back in, right? And that was a real life learning experience for us going through this right now.
Okay. And James, would a giant inflatable Aloha fly at Melbourne?
That'd be cool, wouldn't it? Right next to the airport there as well. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think finding other experiences that you can bundle up with your experiences, a lot of us are on, large tracts of land and looking for development opportunities. Definitely when you can increase that utilization on site, then, I think driving that through F&B and retail and things like that is a really strong opportunity. I was trying to think about, obviously we've made no mistakes at Urban Surf. It's been perfect. So so I can't give you a negative one at all. I was trying to think of some positive ones though. And I think there's a really good example, and it probably speaks to a bit of a concept that I have, that on-site doesn't stop with someone leaving your site. And that when I think of on-site, I think it's important to think of your digital ecosystem as part of your venue. And so what I mean by that is that when someone's having a brand experience through your website, through your socials, through other, adjacent things that you can offer in the digital realm, that's just as important as that on-park experience, because it's, it's an ancillary revenue line from a commercial perspective, and it's keeping someone engaged with your brand from a community perspective. So Flow State has been a really strong success story for us in both of those in two different ways. One is in that digital ecosystem, is that someone leaves the site, but then they're coming back into our ecosystem on a regular basis to get their footage, to look at those waves, to remember what an awesome time they have, or to realize that, geez, my backhand barrel riding is not really what I thought it was. Whatever the case may be, they're staying in our digital ecosystem. And that's, almost as important as keeping that person on site, because they're continuing to touch, feel, smell the brand, remember what a great time they have and want to come back. So I think that's an important thing. And Flow State's been great for doing that. I think it's also been really good on site. So Three Blue Ducks is our hospitality partner in Melbourne, and they installed large screens in the restaurant area, and Flow State's got a replay mode, which essentially 15 minutes or even less after the session finishes, they start replaying all the waves from the previous session. And so the reason that we were really supportive of this is that if you think about our progressive surfer, which is a big cohort in our sort of segmentation, they're using us as a driving range, right? Like that's essentially the analogy that I use. We're a driving range for surfers. And so they want to improve, they want to get better. And a key part of that is looking at visual assets. I don't love the idea of looking at myself while I'm actually in the water, but I want to look at myself afterwards. When I look in the water, I get in my own head and I'm like, oh, God, I thought I was ripping and I'm clearly not. And so by providing these screens, we were actually driving these progressive customers that traditionally have been a jump in the water, surf quickly, get back to work sort of customer. And we were keeping them on site. If you look at regional or state tourism organizations, the clear mantra here is one more night, one more coffee. And we were getting that one more coffee because they were coming in and they were watching those videos. But that then expanded out. We found these progressive surfers were bringing their laptops in and they were sitting there and watching the videos and co-working out of our restaurant. And again, that's just driving that food and beverage revenue over and over again. And so this has expanded so much to the point where we've now opened the upstairs mezzanine level, which in Three Blue Ducks, Brian, we've opened that entire area up as like a viewing area. So you can come up there after you surf and you can watch your Flow State videos. They rotate through everyone's videos, but people are using that as a co-work space. They're spending a lot more time on site. They're spending a lot more money with our F&B, and they're still, we're doing a better job of the job that we do for this customer, in that they're helping progress on all those sorts of great touch points that we're able to offer. So, for us, using Flow State as a way of keeping customers within our digital ecosystem, which is always an important part. Time on site, dwell time on site is just as important as time on your website. You've got a lot of planes there in Maui, Skip. There must be a lot of story down there, right? Someone should build a surf park in Maui. And then obviously keeping them in the venue itself, but attaching that to a revenue stream has been really successful as well. So that's a great example of understanding your customer, providing a service that makes sense for them, and then being able to attach commercial value to that. I haven't looked at the data since we've done it, but no doubt across our membership base and our sort of value product suite customers that come on a regular basis, we'd be increasing the average transaction value both through the purchase of Flow State, but also through F&B that they're having on site.
Okay. Well, it's
it's a great point.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add to the whole F&B facility and how you structure that really adds to dwell time with it. the big screens, whether it be the replays from the surf, which we're doing the same thing with our Surfline partnership too, a similar thing. But also if it comes to, showing the big game, if it's the Super Bowl, have them building programs where they surf and then watch the big game afterwards, right? Or programs that have entertainment. We do a lot of talk story events where we bring in celebrities from the surf or, photography or video world and use the, big screens as a backdrop. And I think you saw that, Brian, as the giant screen we have as the centerpiece of our food and beverage experience, and that digital experience and that immersion of people to have a reason to hang out and stay and be entertained, either watching the surfing from the front row of the food and beverage venue, or being able to watch the screens and seeing or watching the entertainment that's there too.
Okay. I wanted to raise, sorry, Brian, to touch on.
Go ahead, James.
We were seriously hijacking your conversation.
No, it's great because you obviously know more on the subject than I do, so that's the whole reason you're here. So
you should have known putting me and Skip together was never going to be a quiet conversation.
Yeah, well,
I think you mentioned there your tourism component, and I think that's a really key segment for the future of surf parks, especially a pure play public access surf park. In Australia, there's Tourism Australia data that 28% of visitors to Australia want to have a surfing experience. I know surfing is Hawaiian, but Duke brought surfing to Sydney, and it's now a part of our cultural DNA. We're one of the few countries that the Molly Picklum, Katie Simmers heat was almost a monoculture moment in Australia. Everyone's talking about it. Yeah. So, surfing has this, ingrained sort of place in our cultural DNA. And so, 28% of tourists when they come to Australia say they want to have a surf experience. And yet, only a third of those people will actually do that. And most of the time it's because of fears of sharks and, dangers in the ocean, inconsistent conditions, and all these, I can't swim, all these sorts of things that would stop people. So it's a highly aspirational market. 28% of, many millions of tourists is a good chunk of a market. But one of the challenges that we often have in surf parks is that, where we're getting accessible land and where we're able to do these developments isn't always on a public transport line or doesn't have easy accessibility. So again, thinking about how am I going to get my visitors and my tourists that are going to fill my park Monday to Friday out to my park from the city hotels or from over where the main tourism hub is a really important consideration that I think sometimes gets, it's something that we're playing from behind in Melbourne. When we speak to ITOs or even when we're working with the OTAs, having a connected product through to those key sort of tourism accommodation hubs is something that's important. So, it's not just keeping your guests on site, it's getting your guests to site and making sure that's a clear end-to-end hassle-free experience. I think can add some real value to the development and is definitely something worth thinking about when you're sort of building the early stages of that development out.
It's a huge component with any of our locations that are anywhere near a tourism hub, and Hawaii. It's a big piece of this, and we're working with all the destination management companies are a huge piece of it, right? And working with those. There's the FIT tourists that are, you try to attract, but really if you can get into the channel that has the people that are booking them as part of these bundling and packaging, that creates a dwell time. They'll book ahead and have more than just a surf session book. They'll book the surf, they'll book the paddle, they'll book the other activities to do. And I think it goes back, I'm going to bring back something on that ties right into what you're talking about. It's the group business, right? And group business is a great dwell time business. These people come do multiple activities. There's food and beverage involved. A lot of times they're hosting, whether they bring in entertainers for their groups or if they're a corporate group, want to have their, CEO do his speech and stuff. So as you design your space, it's really important that you allocate and plan to where you're going to host those types of groups and people. Because what you don't want to do is have to take over the entire consumer restaurant with 150 of guests from Microsoft that are going to displace all your normal business that would be there that day. So there's a real conceptual planning that has to go on to think about those type of guests too, because groups, the biggest revenue days we've ever had in the last year of operating at Waikai have been all around group bookings, right? And it's hands down, that is the key to financial hitting your numbers and making success is accelerating your group business and filling those times of need. And it's a huge piece of it, because those, like I say, those are the longest dwell time groups. They'll come for half days, full days as a group.
Yeah, I think the corporate one is a key one there. I think an interesting lesson for us in Melbourne, and Brian's been to Melbourne. It's built out of shipping containers. It's a fairly basic development, and in hindsight, that was a real advantage for us, because these spaces were fairly modular, so that we were able to do exactly what you say, Skip, is figure out ways to host these groups where it didn't interrupt the flow of some of our other customers. So we installed draping halfway through our surf academy, so that on a midweek day we can bring in a corporate group to the other side of the surf academy. We can set it up banquet, theatre, however they want to set up that room. And we've had a real success in that space. And it wasn't necessarily, a line that we thought would have a huge amount of revenue attached to it, but it's actually turned out to be a real boon. And there's a two-way transaction here, a two-way exchange of value here in that. It's great adjacent revenue for us, or ancillary revenue for us. Space doesn't really cost us much. It's not being used. So if we can commercialize that space, it's great, right? But one of the things that the MICE industry wants, or the corporate events industry wants, is hassle-free experiences where you can offer a shared experience, a unique space, and world-class F&B in one venue. Because most of the time, they've got to book, hey, I've got to go out to Waikato to do my surf experience, and then I've got to go to a hotel to sit in a shitty conference room, and then I've got to go somewhere else to do my F&B. And if you can bundle all these three things in together, I mean, that's the epitome of what we're talking about. It's a great customer experience, both for the guests themselves and also for the organizer, because it's hassle-free, it's easy. And it's delivering from a commercial perspective for us time and time again. And so we've taken that learning into Sydney, and we've got a specific multifunction space now, because we've proven this revenue line. We know it's there. We work really closely, and there's a lot of speakers in this space, right? Like Mark Matthews, the big wave surfer, is one of the most in-demand keynote speakers in the world, talking about, the other side of fear and how you can apply the lessons he's learned through getting smashed there in Maui at Jaws, into your business day. And so we can take Mark Matthews, come and do this amazing keynote address. We can then take people for a surf experience where they're absolutely able to apply those lessons that they've just learned. And then we can take them into Three Blue Ducks, and we can have an amazing world-class food and beverage experience. And, like you say, we've had clients like HP, Intel, Google, major big four banks here in Australia. Their budgets are fantastic. And suddenly you've got a group of 25, 50, 100, 200 guests coming and spending the entire day with you on site. And that's a perfect example. The other point I wanted to touch on there was the tourism business. And it's worth noting that tourism is probably the most funded sector. Anyone out there in surf park land probably understands it's not necessarily easy to raise funds out of the government, because they don't really understand what we're doing. But one of the areas that it is easier to do is through tourism. So regional tourism organizations, state tourism organizations, national tourism organizations, Tourism Hawaii. These sorts of organizations will often help with funding for facilities that will help customers stay in market for another day. So if you're building a visitor experience center, or you're building some weatherproofing, or whatever it may be that's going to help you attract international tourists and keep them in Melbourne, keep them in Sydney, keep them in New South Wales, keep them in Hawaii for a day longer, that's actually a easier path to funding than some of the other paths. Not to say that we've actually been able to nail any of these funding rounds yet, but theoretically, it is a good funding space for surf parks.
Wow. And I saw that when I was at Melbourne, you had an event going on, and on the other side of the curtain were lots of guests enjoying the park in a very separate context than, the tradies going out for their afternoon expert barrel settings. So
it's a very different market.
So in doing this, we're still talking about the facilities and the setup of the park and incorporating larger groups, food and beverage. Let's talk about the waves. Let's talk about surfing. What James at Urban Surf, we sent Sarah Beardmore there to check it out when you first opened. She flew down from Byron, did a report, and she had a great time. But for her partner wasn't able to surf because her partner was a novice surfer. And then she was really excited when She heard that you had the cruiser sessions that came up, which when you first opened, you didn't have, but at some point you saw the need for that. And that goes back to talking about trying things, and some things stick, and trying some things that don't. Do you want to walk us through how that happened?
Yeah, making less wrong decisions again, Brian.
Yes, we all wish.
Yeah. Look, I mean, programming and scheduling waves is an art and a science, a little bit like marketing, right? It's a difficult thing to get right. We're struggling a little bit again in Melbourne, in that what we're seeing now is the return to work. So what was, in 2021, we had, a perfect storm of high disposable income and everyone working from home off the back of COVID. And now we're seeing people go back to the work. And so the way that people are coming to the park and when they're coming to the park is shifting again. So it's something that we're really having to monitor the data on again. The point that you're making there around the expansion of our suite of waves and wave types, I think you can go back to Surf Park Summit I can't remember when I was in San Diego, what was it, 23? Not last year, the year before. This was literally the topic of my discussion was a data-driven approach to surf parks. And that was gathering as much consumer data, whether it's NPS, whether it's qualitative research, as to what that experience was. And we just recognized that, a huge segment of our market was not a core surfer, was not highly competent. And the reason for this becomes pretty obvious when you start to think about the job that we do as a surf park. We don't sell waves, we sell access to waves. If you're a highly competent surfer, you've already solved access to waves, because you can't be a highly competent surfer if you're not surfing a couple of times a week. So we don't necessarily solve the problem for that market as much as we do that progressive market or that aspirational surfer. And the ways that we offered weren't fit for purpose for that market. So, we worked really hard with Waveguard. It's a great part of their technology is that there's just so much agility there in that you can change and reshape the waves to match the customer segmentation that you've got. We did that. And as you know, Brian, now, our cruiser and our progressive turns and our intermediate sessions, they're the bulk of our programming these days. We have far less advanced turn sessions than we used to. You've still got to have those in there, and you've got to think about when that market segment is going to come and how you program it so that they can link a couple of sessions together, because they're generally fit enough to do that. Whereas a progressive or a novice market is generally going to want to surf once. So there's all these interesting considerations that you've got with. But again, it just comes back to, making sure that you're gathering as much data as you can about your customer, understanding your segmentations, understanding the job that you do for that segment, and then programming around that as best you possibly can.
And Skip, what were some of the settings you tried? I know you went from the 100-foot wide down to dividing it to 60 and 30.
So
how did
we actually, it was interesting. We actually have 3 caissons. We can divide it into 3 30-foot lanes if we want to. But we realized that's not going to be a product that we'd ever sell or be able to sell 3 groups of 30 that with a demand for the 30-foot wave, right? We might do that at a buyout if we had a corporate group with all beginners that wanted to all just only need to be on 30-foot waves. But the basis of a Y with the skilled surf set we have there, they really want that wider canvas of a face to draw an arc big, fast turns out on and do airs on. And it's harder to do on a 30-foot wave. So we quickly decided we basically parked one of the dividers of the caissons permanently, basically. And we only operate in the 30, 65-foot or 100-foot mode. So those 2 operating modes, and we've been playing around with the number of days of the week that we do both on. We unfortunately can't change that setting fast enough to do it midday. We can only do it overnight. So the time it takes. So we do right now we're running Monday, Tuesdays of the 100-foot waves. And then the rest of the week, we're running the 65, 30-foot session, right? And realize that a 65-foot standing wave that we have, deep water standing wave, is still the biggest deep water standing wave in the world at 65 feet. There's no one else that has as big a wave. So that wave is still an incredibly fun, high-performance wave, but we can still do everything you'd like that you can on the 100-foot wave too. So that product works well and allows us to have the capacity and the throughput we need to justify the revenue models and having 20 people an hour rather than 10 people an hour on the wave, which is just part of the business decisions we've made right now. But one of the other key things since you've been there, Brian, is that we spent a lot of time working on, when we opened up, we were fully analog wave setting. How we changed the floaters, how we changed the speed of the water was all done manually. We have now completely digitized the experience and have a full controller working with WaveGuard and a custom controlled device that we can have iPads on the side of the wave now. And we can create waves that change during the type of the day. We can run advanced sessions, beginner sessions, air sessions, and or if a group does a buyout and they want to have the air section on front side and they're all regular footers and you want the air section further, you can get more speed on that side of the wave, we can move the air section all with the push of a button on demand, on the fly, and have these great automated controls now that are digitized and instantly available to our guests. We do quite often now.
Okay. And in coming up with the different wave settings, James, I'd like to hear from you. Are you doing anything differently at Sydney? And as far as the wave settings, it has to be a different surfing demographic, or is it? And how do you factor that in?
And I've got 15 minutes to answer that question.
No, you've got 5 minutes. We're going to turn it over to the audience to send in their questions.
Oh, Brian, that's such a difficult question to answer. I mean, the simple answer is we don't know in Sydney. I think the problem that we solve in Sydney is very different. It's just a larger scale. So anyone that surfed in Sydney, while the beaches are closer physically than they are to Melbourne, it's actually just as hard to get to those beaches. The other thing that you're facing is that they're city beaches. I stayed in Manly Vale last summer, which is about 2.5 kilometers from Manly. For me to get down there, park, which cost $25 an hour to park on the beach. So no way I was paying that. So I'd drive back 1 kilometer and then I'd run down and burn my feet. And then I'd be, it's a really competitive lineup for shitty 1 foot waves. I come from Bells and Winky. I can hassle with the best of them, but that is a competitive lineup. So, access to surf in Sydney, while it's just there physically, is still really challenging. And again, that's the problem that we solve, is access to surf. So I think, the market that we'll serve in Sydney will probably be quite similar. The level that I geek out on wave developments is probably bordering on obsessive. The way that we think about it and the design and development process that we're working on with WaveGuard, so that we can create the most fit for purpose waves in Sydney is really exciting, and we're about to dive into that. So, maybe we hold that conversation for maybe a podcast episode down the track once we've done Sydney and we've rolled out, some of these design processes and development processes, and we can talk there. But, I think there was a really key theme that ran through a previous business or startup that I worked in, was to take the stairs, not the elevator. And I think with wave development, that's quite a good framework with which to do, is that you build something that you think is as right as possible, but then you're slowly iterating and slowly changing and slowly learning. If you just go to, it's got to be this and this is where it's at, then you're not learning. Whereas if we start with A, but we're really conscious of how we measure the success of A, then we can slowly transition to B, to C, to D, and do it in a meaningful and a thoughtful way that delights customer and aligns most effectively with what is a fit for purpose wave for that market. I hope that's answered your question.
And you got a great partner with WaveGuard, who's doing so much fantastic work with all their facilities and wave, generating new wave types all the time, it seems.
I agree. And I think when people think about one of the things I love about WaveGuard is that they've been really open to changing the wave types. It wasn't as, no, these are the waves that you get. It's they have lent into this. Like, I'm so thankful for the effort that they've put in. The amount of hours that I've been at the park from 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're on the other end of the line in Spain helping us develop better waves is phenomenal. And like, Brian, I think you would attest to that. The waves that we have today in Melbourne are so much better than the waves that we started with. And that, I don't mean better as in terms of they're bigger barrels and they're 10 foot and they're amazing and look at these tubes. They're small, perfect, progressive waves that core customer, that progressive surfer that we're solving the problem of accessibility, can jump on that wave and progress their surfing it's light and day, and it's it's one of the things that I think has been a real success story for us in Waveguard, and something I'm super proud of as well.
So I have to ask, are you just going to onboard the same settings to Sydney and see if you make fewer mistakes?
Same session types, but what the waves look like under that potentially be different. I mean, it's they're different lagoons, so you can't just take A and put it into B.
Oh, that's right. How many modules
Yeah, I mean,
do you have at Sydney?
It's the same size as
Same size, okay.
But there's obviously it's 5. I don't know how
evolution of the yeah.
So it is a different machine bathymetry as well.
You would have to get Waveguard on to answer those questions, right?
Okay,
good try though.
And what I'd like to ask is, as we close out, I want to ask the audience, go ahead and send in your questions. But what I'd love to hear from Skip and from James is, what are you really excited about implementing in the future? Maybe it's something that you're like, oh, with this new technology, I'll be able to do this. Or like with Flow State, how it's really enhanced the experience at Urban Surf. Maybe there's something you're kind of salivating, ready to get into.
And if you're not salivating, Skip, you're in the wrong industry, because
yeah,
you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning.
I'm salivating about because we're not only working on Waika, we're working on multiple projects, and I kind of salivate in the evolution of the design and the concepts around surf parks, and not just everything's evolving so quickly here. As James said, it's a nascent industry, and every time one of these gets rolled out, it gets better and better. And I just salivate where this is going in the space, and where it's going to be in 5 years from now, and how great the facilities and the parks are going to be as people recognize a lot of these ancillary, elements, whether, skate parks are being built into these, and pump tracks, and, you're seeing standing waves with lagoon waves side by side coming into play this year. You got, all these new things, and I'm just excited overall for an industry. That's what I'm salivating at right now, and seeing new technology providers get on. Everyone's just waiting for Endless Surf's wave to come out in Munich, and seeing how that's going to evolve, as they're going to be a big player in the future of the space. There's the new wave in the Netherlands that I saw was starting to produce waves in the last couple months too. And there's a lot of amazing things going on, and I jokingly always say this is a big kid science fair we all got lucky enough to be part of right now. And I think, we're on to a great time. The other industries that I came from in the past, like the ski industry, went through this evolution of technology with how good their growing machines became for making runs, the progressive ability for anyone to be able to ski. The chairlifts became better, the gondolas, the food and beverage setups. All that's going to happen in the surf park industry, and that is really what gets me excited right now every day.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's so many exciting developments out there. I'm excited to see how Surf Abu Dhabi do with, KS Wavecode 2.0. Like that's a really interesting one to look at. I'm so excited for Revel to open. That's a great example of a park that's then built all these other things around it, commercial, retail, all these sorts of things. It's got standing, it's got their own technology. There's so many interesting things happening with Matt and Shane and the team over there. I'm super excited to sort of see that. I know they're having a few teething problems at the moment, but I'm excited to see Palm Springs as, a sort of a luxury destination. It's almost the first of the sort of heli skiing models. I'm really excited to see that. So there's lots I'm excited. From our perspective in Melbourne, we obviously just ran the BYD Pro, which was a QS 3000. And for the first time, we sort of stepped away from that linear event development in surfing, which is like, hey, how do we run a surf contest like we do on the beach? How do we run that in a pool? To how do we take the advantages of the pool, which is the fact that I can tell a major TV network in Australia, Channel 7, where we broadcasted live for 2.5 hours, I'm going to tell them that I'm going to turn on the waves at, what did we turn it on? 4:30, and the event will be done by 7 o'clock. And, we did this incredible made for TV broadcast. You can see a version of it on YouTube. It's not the same sort of exact version that ran on the mainstream networks, but doing these sort of 2.5 hour made for TV surf comps with amazing waves and epic surfers and, really well programmed. We can program stuff around the waves. I think that's good. The other one that we're really having a lot of success with in Melbourne is connecting our partnership program to this conversation around dwell time. So we've just partnered with BYD, currently the biggest EV manufacturer in the world. They've just overtaken Tesla, which is great. EVs, surfing, it makes a lot of sense. And that, ticks a lot of sustainability boxes for us. But what we're actually offering is customer test drives. So, if Skip's coming down and his partner doesn't want to go for a surf or and doesn't want to hang out in the F&B or in the shade, they can take a new car for a test drive. And so providing these experiences for people to touch, feel, smell brand partners that extends out dwell time and ladders up commercially, ladders up from a community perspective, brings more people to the surf park. These are sort of exciting things that we're doing at the moment. But clearly, Sydney is the most exciting thing. So.
All right. And since we launched Friday sessions on Wave Pool Mag, we've discovered that a lot of the audience are people involved in the surf park industry, just kind of starting out. They have a project somewhere. I mentioned some countries earlier before we went on air. As veterans, which is amazing, like 5 years makes someone a veteran in such a young space. I'd love to leave with each of you imparting some advice, whether helicopter view or specific, for someone opening their own surf park. What would you advise in terms of keeping customers on site? Oh, I stumped y'all.
No. I'm happy to go. It's the basics, right? Have a clear view of who you're building the park for. Think about the job that you do for that customer and have clear measurements in place to understand whether it's working at both a commercial level. So that's have a clear way of understanding your ATV or average transaction value and your customer lifetime value. And then looking to see if there are qualitative measures or ways that you can understand the impact that this is having on the customer experience and whether it's helping convert these customers from one-time customers towards the end game of being a brand evangelist. And that is business 101, and it applies to surf parks just as it applies to pretty much any other product that you do. I think that's an underlying principle. I think the other thing is to look for modular solutions that you can adjust and iterate on as you start to understand who your customer actually is, because the one thing that you'll 100% not nail on the head is that customer segmentation out of the box. But the ability to be agile and be data-driven in the way that you shift and change those spaces is something that's been, really powerful for us in Melbourne. But that's it.
Right on. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess, from my perspective right now, I think is, thinking back and going through the planning with the developers in the early stages right now is really making sure you consider what these ancillary opportunities around that, whatever surf technology you're picking is, and fight for the ones that you are important to keep in and have that voice. And there's going to be a push for, saving money here and saving money there. There's enough data out there and enough experience around surf parks right now. The things that are fundamental that are going to make the difference to being successful. But, land banking, as James was saying, and having flexibility to make adjustments after you open, that is a crucial thing to plan for, so you don't have commitments that box you into something that may not work, and being able to have flexible use space and having ability to then say, hey, this is where it's going. Let's now build this second thing. Think about your surf park as a phased operation instead of this is what we're building and this is it in finality forever. And think of, a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and be ready to adapt to what that market will demand once you do open.
Okay. Well, right on. I want to thank both of you so much for taking time out. James, getting up at 5:30 in the morning.
That's a lesson for surf park developers on there. You will get up a lot at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you will be up at midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning as well.
Wow, you get the phone calls. We have a flood in the kitchen. 2 in the morning. The alarm's going off. Yeah.
Okay, right on. Thank you very much.